Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm pleased to be joined by Nicole Somers, CEO Diadem Performance, who will be presenting on how to become a highly skilled presenter in all areas of your life. In a moment, I'll pass over to Nicole to start the webinar, but just before I do, I'd just like to let everyone know that there'll be a poll question and a Q&A section at the end of this webinar. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type them in, and we hope to answer all of them at the end. For any unanswered questions, don't worry, Nicole has kindly agreed to reach out to you following the webinar with her answers. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Nicole, who can start the presentation.
Thank you so much, Paul, for that warm introduction. I'm delighted to be back again, sharing the next hour with everyone. So my mission is to set people up for success, to help them deliver their commercial and personal best when it matters most. Being a commercial skills trainer and an executive coach, I've clocked up to well over 30,000 hours of trying to inspire people to provoke action. So coming across in an inspirational way and landing my messages with impact, making a good impression are all really rather important. So in today's webinar, I wanted to share with you all some top tips, strategies, and practical tools on how to be a highly skilled presenter. Whether you're presenting a sales report to the board or giving a weekly team briefing, or in fact running a webinar like this, which now I think about it, puts me under a lot of pressure to perform. So listen, whether you're presenting remotely or in person, I think we're going to be let out soon. Apparently it's going to be spring. During today's session, I'm going to cover making the right impression from the get-go, the importance of emotional intelligence when it comes to presenting, developing personal confidence, what to prepare to set yourself up for success, keeping the audience engaged, and staying presenting fit. So let's get started. We are all constantly bombarded with messages, this non-stop flow of information, whether that be in meetings or lectures or whilst we're supposed to be having downtime, especially as we're homing from work. So if you want to cut through all of that noise and make a memorable impression, then you've got to start by realizing you're competing for people's time and attention. So if you want to supercharge your performance, you need to bring your whole and best self to that mission. And first impressions really do count. We as humans are hardwired to make snap judgments. Like it or not, there are so many subconscious biases that our brains use to categorize and make sense of the complicated world that we live in. And once an impression has been formed, it's actually quite hard to change the imprint you've made on someone's conscience. So when you're making an impression, you've got to be authentically you. I actually believe it's exhausting trying to fake it till you make it. And you want to be building trust and credibility from the get-go. And I absolutely love this quote from Will Rogers: "You never get a second chance to make a first impression." Now, in my experience, people are so much more likely to devote extra time and effort into preparing for those big moments in professional life, such as a job interview or a pitch for a new client. These, though, are the formal plays. I know the stakes are high and there is pressure to perform. Of course, they're important, but we should also not neglect the informal setting. We are actually in those about 80% of the time, and we should dedicate an appropriate amount of conscious effort in those situations as well. And the secret here is to flex your presenting style according to the particular situation you're in. So as you can see on the slide in front of you, the blue and the green, there is an overlap. So if you think about social media, for example, the impression that you want to make on a platform like LinkedIn is more likely to be formal versus the one that you want to convey on Facebook or Instagram. I believe that you need to present a consistent image that reflects the real professional you. I'm sure we've all heard of, and hopefully not experienced, employers who have checked out social media profiles as part of their recruitment process for potential candidates. It's really important that you think about your digital fingerprint, not just the interview when you're in front of them. So if you want to set yourself up for success appropriately in every setting, make sure you think about the informal as well as those formal settings. And I've given you on the slides in front of you a starter for 10 of what some of those settings may be. But clearly there are loads more examples to consider. So now if we think about being authentically you and presenting the real you in every single situation appropriately, it is so important that you dial up your emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is fundamentally a set of emotional and social skills that are most effective at influencing others. And it's the ability to recognize and manage your own emotions and those of others that holds the key to helping you identify the real you and the ability to communicate effectively to all these different audiences in all these different settings. So I'm sure many of you on today's webinar have heard of the term emotional intelligence. I actually think that we're more often able to spot lack of emotional intelligence than emotional intelligence itself. And it's a myth that you either have it or you don't. And it's way more than just empathy, which I imagine is what many of you thinking emotional intelligence is right now. It's way more than just empathy. It's actually a set of 10 skills or building blocks. And it's the clever combination of these and the application of them at the right time, in the right way, that makes emotional intelligence such a differentiator and actually a competitive advantage when you are presenting. So if I dive into emotional intelligence in greater detail and help you understand how you can supercharge it when you're presenting, you'll be a long way forward towards setting yourself up for success. So if we start with the inner circle, the pink bubble, you'll see that self-knowing is the first skill that I refer to. Self-awareness is often described as the cornerstone of emotional intelligence, like the foundation. This is because we have to take time out to really work out what we do well and what we need to work on. And if you think about that in the context of presenting, that's going to help you raise your game. However, that said, developing your self-knowledge can be easier said than done. If you ask people for feedback on your presenting style, the chances are you are going to get comments that will probably be either vanilla and bland and unhelpful, or in fact overly critical. So I think the challenge is to be brave and hold up the mirror and give yourself a full appraisal to understand what you're doing well and what makes you tick and what you need to do differently in these different presenting scenarios and situations. I think it's important to be brave, to accept who you really are and draw on your self-confidence, which is the second building block and skill set, and actually your self-reliance to back yourself and believe in what you stand for. Your challenge is then to communicate that authentically whilst drawing on the fourth building block there, the self-control, to be situationally appropriate. Dialing up self-control is going to massively help you think live in the moment and manage your stress levels and counter the nerves that you may present with. So that's the inner bucket. Now let's think about the other bucket, the blue bubble. That's the circle that relates to your ability to leave that memorable impression that I was talking about before. You've got to be able to draw on your empathy, which is about putting yourself in the shoes of your audience and understanding their particular needs. By seeing things from their perspective, you can then use your relationship skills to connect with them on a deeper level. This could be about having a more meaningful conversation in an informal situation, or asking rhetorical questions that capture the audience's attention in a more formal setting. And being straightforward is about your dealings with other people. And this is going to enhance your credibility and help you build trust over time. What about the green circle, the outer circle, the outer focus? This is about skills that help you navigate these different presenting situations. You need your optimism and a growth mindset to help you believe that you can keep improving your performance. And by pushing yourself outside your comfort zone into your stretch zone, you'll be able to achieve a sort of greater sense of fulfillment and satisfaction of a job well done. That's actually what self-actualization is all about. And your adaptability, which is the middle one in that bucket, will play such a crucial role in your ability to present yourself in all these different scenarios and circumstances that you will find yourself in. So that's a bit of a setup. So if I now share with you the common presenting challenges that people experience. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I've got many years under my belt of experience of helping people with their presentations, whether this be in the in-person setting or remote setting that we're working in at the moment. On the slide in front of you, you've got 5 of the most common challenges that people share with me that they are facing from a presenting point of view. Glossophobia, if you've not heard of that term before, I'm sure most of you have felt what glossophobia is all about, and that is the fear of public speaking. The very mention of the word often brings people out in a cold sweat, and actually up to 75% of the population are likely to shy away from the opportunity to speak in public. In fact, that actually scores more than the fear of death. How bonkers is that? Which is what led Jerry Seinfeld, if you've heard of him, he's the American comedian, he's a very funny guy. He famously said that people would prefer to be in the coffin than doing the eulogy. I mean, that is just crazy. What about the second one, which is about tipping the scales from just using the presentation opportunity, and I suppose I'm talking more about the formal setting here, as the ability to finally have the audience there so that you can tell them everything you know about everything. I'm sure all of you that are on this webinar today have sat on the receiving end of presentations that are much more telling versus inspiring. Okay, number 3 then. Perhaps it is that your confidence is not coming through, or your passion for the topic is not evident. Sometimes picking up the clicker drains people's personality and the human touch. Certainly right now, people are so fazed by and anxious about the perceived lack of engagement from their audience, or the actual lack of engagement from their audiences, especially when people have their cameras off, when they're using Zoom or Teams or WebEx or Skype. And that increase in anxiety can have a big impact on people's performance. And the last one is handling those hecklers, the questions, the interruptions, those difficult challenges. So to coin a rather annoyingly used phrase these days, we're all in the same presenting storm, but maybe we're actually in different boats. I actually thought now would be a good time to launch the poll, and see what you all, there are 151 of you on the call, perhaps you can share with me your biggest challenge. So vote for, so Paul's put the poll up there, vote for one of those that is phasing you the most, is challenging you the most when you are presenting, whether it be in fact in the formal setting or the informal setting. So let's just see.
Excellent. So just to let you know, we've got the poll open, so we'll leave it a few moments for everyone to answer. Just for the audience to know, if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please type them in. We will have a Q&A section at the end, so we hope to answer all of those during that time. So we are almost at capacity. Okay, so the results are in. So the poll question was, which of these presenting challenges most resonates with you? So we have 31% say managing my nerves, 23% say inspiring others, 8% say communicating my confidence and passion, 19% say engaging and interacting with the audience, and 18% say handling interruptions and difficult people. So I'll pass back over to you, Nicole.
So interesting. So the glossophobia, that nerves, that fear of public speaking, came out as number one, and it doesn't surprise me. But actually, a healthy balance there between all of the other, all of the others got votes. So sounds like I've got the right content in the rest of the presentation to help you. So let's keep going with the slide pack. Okay, so let's tackle first of all the confidence, which will massively help you with overcoming those stage fright and the nerves that you're feeling. And I think the first step to developing your presenting confidence is to actually recognize your confidence comes from within. In my experience, what happens is people spend all their time preparing physically for their presentations. So that could either be the writing of the speech, or it could be putting the PowerPoint slides together. But actually, people underestimate that mental preparation that you need to leave that good and lasting and authentic impression. And if you've heard that famous quote, believe you can and you're halfway there, or you may have heard the Henry Ford version, which is if you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're probably right. It's actually very, very hard to put into words how you're feeling. We're often much more able to access what we think than what we feel. So my advice would be, break down your awareness into these three areas. Your emotional awareness, which is how you're feeling. Your behavioral awareness, which is how you would be impacting on others. And this one is especially relevant to presenting, and this is your non-verbal communication. That's the body language and that the non-verbal cues that you use. And so all too often we focus most of our attention on the spoken word and not enough on the delivery. And ironically, if I go back to the comment I made before about feedback, we receive most of the useful feedback from the audience about the content and not about the delivery. So it then makes it even harder to improve. So make sure that you are doing the right amount of rehearsing and record yourself using either your voice record on your smartphone or record yourself presenting with a camera to your screen whilst you're working remotely. So those are some top tips and strategies on how you can develop your presenting confidence. And again, if that glossophobia, that nerves, was high on your list, which it was for 31% of you, it can be really hard to banish your nerves. So it's important you lean into the nerves and know where you are on the graph in front of you. But what doesn't challenge you is not going to change you. It's not helpful to be in your comfort zone when you're presenting or making a first impression. If you're in your comfort zone, and this is perhaps more of the informal situations, the likelihood is you'll approach it with complacency, perhaps not putting in the amount of effort that you should. It's much more common though in the formal settings that people catapult into that panic zone. And the problem with being in the panic zone and feeling panicked when you're presenting is you are more likely to feel overwhelmed, not be able to think straight. It might make it really hard for you to decide what the content of what you're going to present is going to be. You might not be able to sleep the night before. I'm sure that never happens in your world. And you might be dreading that phrase, can I give you some feedback on your presentation? Even if it's going to be constructive, it will feel like personal criticism if you're in your panic zone when you're presenting. So it is optimum to feel some level of challenge and being in your stretch zone. That is the area where, as you can see on the slide, you will perform at your best. So how do you get into your presenting stretch zone? Make a plan. Break down your goal into manageable chunks, but be kind to yourself. You know, if you really do suffer with glossophobia and that fear of public speaking, don't volunteer to do the town hall presentation in your organization, and don't volunteer to do a keynote at a conference. Break it into bite-sized chunks and build yourself up to success. Second of all, I would say get some feedback. So you need to find somebody who will give you appropriate and honest feedback. And actually giving feedback is a skill in itself. So pick that person or those people wisely. Thirdly, visualize success. Athletes do this really well. They visualize themselves achieving their peak performance or winning the race or winning the championship. So from a presenting point of view, make sure that you picture yourself making a great impression, delivering with passion and enthusiasm, or signing the contract for your new job, whatever your presenting scenario is. Visualize your success. And I suppose the fourth thing that I would recommend you to call on is to consider who around you in your world is inspiring. Who do you know that is a great presenter in the context of the situation you are going to be presenting in? And ask yourself, what would they do in this situation? And next, I would say feed your good wolf. Now, what on earth do I mean by that? Well, there's a famous parable based on a story of two wolves that fight a battle in our heads. The story in the parable is by a chap called Billy Graham. And in his tale, he talks about the good wolf. And the good wolf in the context of presenting stands for, I'm going to deliver a great presentation. I'm going to leave a lasting impression, and the one that I want to leave. And the bad wolf stands for, well, you don't know your stuff and the audience always ask difficult questions. Essentially, in Billy Graham's story, he eloquently highlights the range of emotions that do battle in our presenting heads. He doesn't actually talk about presenting, but I'm adding that into the mix. And the story ends with one wolf winning the battle. And the wolf that wins the battle is the one you feed. So when it comes to presenting, make sure you're feeding your good presenting wolf. If your bad wolf is saying to you, they're going to judge you by your performance, that's self-doubt. What you've got to do is drown the voice, drown that voice out, and feed the good wolf by finding a counter argument that says something like, well, it just gives me this presenting opportunity, the chance to demonstrate my knowledge because I am subject matter expert. You feed that good wolf by finding evidence to reinforce the new belief. And the more you do that, the more you'll feed your good wolf, the more you will starve your bad wolf. And that good wolf story is something that I hope you use and leaves a memorable impression on you. So given the glossophobia, I had a sneaky suspicion it would come out on top as the thing that you would find challenging. Here are my 5 tips summarized on the slide in front of you. Develop that self-belief, face your fears, and get yourself into your stretch zone. Find that trusted advisor. Remind yourself why you should feel confident about the presenting situation you're in, and be inspired by others. Now, also, what really helps people with confidence is knowledge, and knowledge of the content that you are going to be presenting with. So knowing the purpose of your presentation and being really clear on how you're going to inspire your audience will help you develop the confidence that you need. So it is quite challenging at the moment to inspire people. And actually inspiring your audience was the second thing that you're finding most challenging. So this is the bit that's for you, that whoever answered the poll that way. Understanding the purpose of your presentation and asking yourself, right, so at the end of this, what is it that I want? What is the outcome I'm after? Is the secret to success. And if you then add in the emotional intelligence, the empathy to put yourself in your audience's shoes and consider their perspective when they come to this presentation, what's in their heads, what's their mindset? Think about their needs in the context of what they're currently thinking about, what they are feeling and what they are doing, and actually what do you want them to think, feel and do as a result of your presentation. That is going to really help you fast track your thinking to be able to address and understand their needs. It's also worthwhile thinking about their personality type and their preferences for how they like to receive information. Because if you do this, it will make it much, much easier for you to connect with them, land your key points, and build trust and genuine connections with them. So the more effort you put in before you put pen to paper to understanding your audience's needs and matching them towards what you're trying to achieve with your presentation, the better and greater impact you're going to have. So then we're kind of getting closer towards getting on platform and delivering your presentation. So you've thought about your audience's needs. Now you need to set yourself up for success. So wherever possible, you've got to become familiar with the physical environment in which you're presenting, especially if you're doing it remotely. Make sure that you've done, it sounds like really obvious stuff to say, but it's amazing how many people get tripped up by this stuff live in the moment. Make sure that you've turned off all of those notifications that interrupt you in your life, whether it be your washing machine or it be your Ring doorbell or it be your WhatsApp or Slack channel. So make sure that you have turned all of those off. Also, sounds really obvious, but make sure you thought about your background, the stuff people can see behind you, the lighting and the sound from the environment that you're presenting in. Okay, so that's all under the heading of managing your environment. Number two is, I think it's so super important, you know your slides. The slides aren't for you, the slides are for them, and you need to know the flow of your story as well. This type of preparation helps you be present and live in the moment. And the more present and live you can be in the moment, the more bandwidth you've got to interact with your audience. The better preparation you do on your slides and the flow and managing the environment, the more you will be able to feel present so that you can interact live in the moment. Okay, and then your job is to grab their attention, and engaging the audience was third on the list of the stuff that you are finding challenging. So your role as a presenter is to control the audience's attention span. Experts would tell us that we face and have something like 70,000 thoughts a day. That's between 2,500 and 3,500 thoughts per hour. That's a lot of noise and interference in your audience's brains that you've got to cut through. So that you can land your messages in a way that leaves the audience feeling compelled and inspired and wanting to do things differently as a result of your presentation. So how on earth do we do that? Well, if you look at the graph on the left-hand side, it shows you the decay in people's attention over time. The best I think you can hope for, and we're probably about 20 minutes into our presentation today, the best you can hope for is 20 minutes. And if you're talking to senior people in organizations, that can be, or in fact my family, that can be even less time you've got to land your messages. So the key is to cut through. You've got to capture their attention by doing things like I'm suggesting on the right-hand graph, creating these spikes of interest that come from what you say, your voice, and your movement. So let's think about that for a second, right? How do we do that? And the very first spike of interest is about getting off to a strong start and hooking them in. There are 3 tips here on the slide, and you'll be amazed how many people forget to establish their name and their credibility at the beginning of their presentation. They'll forget their name, they'll forget their company, they'll assume people know who they are or the background. So you've got to make sure that you've explained to them you're the expert in the field and you use your qualifications, your experience to project confidence and credibility without appearing arrogant. So in a formal setting like today, Paul kindly introduced me, and if you watch the recording back, you will see how I demonstrated and introduced myself with credibility at the beginning. I think it's really important then that you resist the temptation to just dive into slide one, and you start with something memorable, something that's relevant, something topical. A rhetorical question would work, something like, how exactly are we going to meet our budget? Perhaps you could discuss a current relevant event, please no COVID. Or it could be a provocative statement or sharing an impressive statistic. And the second spike is then to explain to them how you want them to interact with you. Questions as you go or questions at the end. And as I said, Paul kindly did that for me at the beginning of today's session. So next, what you've got to do is you've got to build, I think, and structure your presentation around a compelling story. And since the creation of language, stories have been at the heart of our ability to communicate and understand the world around us. So why not capture people's attention and engage them by using a story framework to help you do that? And instead of having to make these up for yourself, there are actually 7 classic story frameworks and structures that can help you as a starter for 10. So here are the 7. Overcoming the monster. This is the sort of heartwarming story of bravery when the hero overcomes evil against all odds. So this is a great one to use to demonstrate how you've overcome a particular obstacle. Or there's the rag to riches tale, which is where the hero overcomes poverty and hardship to achieve, great success and wealth. So this could be how you explain that you've overcome some early struggles by taking risks. Or what about the voyage and the return? So this is the story of traveling to new lands and returning wiser and stronger. So this is an example. You could use this as an example to show how you've prepared to move out of your comfort zone and learn something new. Or the quest, like I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. The tale of a group of characters setting off to do a bush tucker trial to achieve a certain mission or goal. So this is a great structure to use to highlight the important role teamwork can play in realizing new objectives, and so on and so forth. There's the comedy, there's the tragedy, the cautionary tale, or there's rebirth, the story of the villain. I don't know why, but I'm thinking of Donald Trump, who finds redemption, you never know, by becoming a better person. You could perhaps use this story to show that change is always possible when we make better choices in life. So not just the story structure itself, but you can create even more of those spikes of interests by using analogies, rhetorical questions, selling numbers, referring to third parties, or using reiteration. So analogies, they are things that give parallel meaning and help us understand things on a more emotional level. And one of my favorite examples of this is Steve Jobs, who said in an interview back in the 90s that the computer is the equivalent to a bicycle of our minds. I just love that analogy that he used. Rhetorical questions is the type of question that prompts people to think. So an example could be why human connection is going to be so important to us in the post-COVID recovery. Selling the numbers is where you use numbers or data to suit your argument. You only have to watch the COVID briefings on the news to see how data is being cleverly used to sell the story they want us to hear. Gosh, I sound so cynical. What about referring to others? That gives credibility and helps establish a slightly different perspective. So I've already mentioned today Steve Jobs, Billy Graham, etc. And then reiteration. Again, there's so many of these examples around us every day in the media. So stay home, protect the NHS, save lives, or hands, face, space. Neatly, all of the time, these come in threes. So you'd be so much better pouring energy and effort into bringing your presentation to life with these ideas than just pouring energy and effort into your PowerPoint slides. So it's not just about the content and the adding in these extra spikes of interest. It's also super important that you focus on your delivery, because this stuff is going to help with engaging the audience. So delivering that confident and polished performance and banishing those nerves comes from not just what you say, but how you say it as well. So if we think about the what you say first, which is the words, I actually think that you've got to balance out your effort into the what you're saying and how you're bringing to life your story with the how you sound and the how you appear. So the what you say, you've got to practice using confident language and avoid using phrases or weak speak filler phrases like hopefullys, probablys, maybes. I'm sure you all have one that you use on a regular basis. And I believe that the cause of weak speak is the lack of preparation and not having a conversational script, which then puts you under pressure to think about how you're going to bring your presentation to life live in the moment. Don't worry that removing weak speak then makes you come across as arrogant. It just doesn't. It makes you come across as confidence. And your ability to communicate clearly and concisely is the ticket to delivering the confidence performance. Okay, next, it's important that you put effort and energy into your voice, which I'm trying my hardest to demonstrate to you as we're on this webinar. So I like to try and think of the voice as an instrument that gives meaning, purpose, clarity, conviction, energy, and those spikes of interest. And the words, just the word hello, I could say it to you in loads of different ways and it would have a totally different meaning. Hello or hello. I mean, they mean totally different. That's got a totally different meaning depending on how I say it. And then there is the pace of your delivery. There's an optimum pace for presenting. It's an average number of words per minute. And I could just share the number with you, but I just don't feel like it would mean anything. So I know everyone's on mute, which is great. In a second, I'm going to put a slide on the screen in front of you. And what I'd like everybody to do is to read the text. There's two columns. There's a pink column and a blue column. The pink column's on the left. I would like you to read the left-hand column, the pink column first, and then read the blue column. But I don't just want you to read the words on the slide, because your reading pace is going to be significantly faster than your presenting pace. In fact, interestingly enough, just to give you the extremes, an auctioneer's pace is about 600 words per minute, and a sports commentator would be about the same, 600 words per minute. When you read at something like 300 or 400 words per minute. So when you read the slide, I want you to read it as if you are presenting it. Okay, so as soon as I turn over the slide, I'm going to put my timer on my watch, and I will shout when your minute is up. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, that's the minute up. I hope you liked my blogs. So the optimum number of words per minute that you should be presenting at is 127. No prizes for guessing that there were exactly 127 words in the pink column and 127 words in the blue column. So if you reach the end of column 2, you're presenting too quickly. And if you didn't reach the end of column 1, you're presenting too slowly. So I think it's really, really helpful to know that stat, because it can help you work out exactly how many words you need in your conversational script. So if your presentation is 10 minutes long, you need to have approximately 1,200 words ready to share with your audience. Interestingly, when I ask people to do this exercise on a workshop, they often say to me that 127 words per minute feels really slow, but it won't be for your audience. And that's the important thing to take away from this bit of these top tips that I'm sharing with you. Okay, so the last 33% that I referred to before is about your delivery and your appearance. So some top tips on that. And presentation is everything. So what you're wearing is actually really important. And I think you should feel authentic and comfortable, and your dress should match the formality of the situation. And I believe this stuff really does matter. So my rule of thumb is that you should always dress one notch up. So if it's kind of a jeans day, then you should go for smart casual trousers. Then there is your posture. Whether you're sat down presenting virtually or on platform, it's important that your posture is confident and balanced, and that you are standing with your feet are hip width apart. Your shoulders should be relaxed, and your hands, you can tell I'm doing that right now, and your hands should be out of your pockets so they are free to gesture, which will help you communicate your key points. If you're sat down, your feet should also be hip width apart, and your feet should be flat on the floor with your bum in the back of the chair. And I remember this by saying it's the BBC position, the bum in the back of the chair. So people by people. I know it's a cliche to say that, but cliches are cliches because they're true. Your facial expressions and your smiling is what communicates the real you. And you should really try and smile and communicate your passion and your passion for the topic. And last but by no means least, there's the awkward thing about the eye contact. So these human touches massively make a difference, and they will really help your audience feel as if you're talking not to the audience as a whole, but to them as an individual. You've got to get the balance right though. So hold somebody's eyes for a thought, not too long, otherwise they'll feel singled out. Hold their eyes for thought and then move on. And if you are ever allowed back into an auditorium and that you're talking to loads of people, tens and tens of people, then you should think about covering all 4 corners of the room. Okay, so now we've done our presentation, we've really thought about the words we're using and the pace we're going at and the tone of voice. Now we need to think about, well, how on earth do we control the hecklers? And actually that scored 18% in the poll that we launched before. So if you dread the Q&A section, this bit's for you. And the dread, I think, comes from the fact that we know this is the unscripted part of the presentation. And it's really where you have to think on your feet. So your self-control and your adaptability and your optimism are all completely key. You've got to take time live in the moment to respond rather than react, and help make sure that you stay in control. So some strategies to help you do that. And by the way, I'm not inviting you to start heckling with me as we get into the question section, which is coming shortly, is to just breathe. I know it sounds obvious, and it's really tempting when you're under attack to hold your breath, but just breathe. You need oxygen to help your brain operate at its best. Then buy yourself some thinking time by giving the person who's asked that really difficult question a compliment by saying something like, That's a really thought-provoking question. Another great strategy is to rephrase a hostile question in a more positive way to remove the emotion. And the last brilliant tip is that you should anticipate the really difficult questions you're going to get. You should do that thinking when you're thinking about the audience, that think, feel, do model I shared with you before, and prepare those responses in advance, because if you want to be live and present in the moment, forewarned is really forearmed. So you've done all the preparation now. You've developed your confidence, you've thought about your mindset, you've thought about the audience, you know exactly how to get started, you've built that compelling story using the Quest framework, you know how you're going to bring the story to life with those spikes of interest, and how you're going to deal with the difficult questions. It's showtime. So you've got to get yourself into the zone, don that super suit, warm your brain up by visualizing how you're going to feel at the end, warm up your body. That's relaxing your shoulders, shaking out your arms, maybe even do a power pose. It will change how you feel. And warm up your tongue, warm up your mouth with some tongue twisters. Look, I just was demonstrating the need to do that. They really do work. Red lorry, yellow lorry, red lorry, yellow lorry. They really help warm up your mouth. And you know what? The last thing you should do is make sure that you hydrate, that you've got water with you. Definitely no caffeine, because that makes you feel jittery. Breathe some deep yogic breaths right into the pit of your stomach. And all of those things together will help you banish those nerves and deal with that last minute stage fright. And there's loads more of these tips and hints and exercises for you to do in my book. You can find it on Amazon. I do believe it's selling really well. It's a really, really useful handbook that will help you stay fit for your everyday and more formal presentations, so that you can make sure that you are leaving that lasting impression that you want to leave. So those were my slides. Now I was going to put my camera on so that you can see me and engage with me and ask me some questions. No heckling allowed. I hope you enjoyed.
Thanks, Nicole. Excellent. So thanks, Nicole, for a great webinar. Lots of questions have been coming in. Lots of great tips, insights throughout the webinar, so they really appreciate you for that. So let's get into the questions. So the first question we've had is, if you're an introvert, how can you make a fantastic first impression when starting a new job?
Okay. Well, the thing about being an introvert is that might be your preference. So you're just going to have to dial up and pretend. It's not faking it till you make it, but you just you can be more outgoing than you are. It might not be your preference to be outgoing. So dial up the more outgoing nature of yourself, and also prepare yourself, right? So prepare for those informal settings and situations, because the more confident you'll get, the more you will be able to be authentically you. So don't use your introversion as an excuse that you can't make a good first impression. Preparation is everything. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Excellent. So we've had a few questions around, obviously everything's gone online. Obviously interviews are all online and businesses online. A lot of webinars are online, like today. So they're asking around, it's around interviews. So how can you stand out on an online interview and make a lasting impression?
Well, that's really thinking about how you prepare for those settings. So you've got to think about your strong opener, which I gave you some tips on. You've got to think about the less is more. So if you're being interviewed, don't use it as an opportunity to just walk them through their CV. They've already got that, otherwise you wouldn't be in the interview. So being succinct, being able to tell your story. So think about which of those story structures that I gave you. Is it a quest? Is it rags to riches? And make sure that you use good evidence and examples, sell the numbers and your your experience in such a way that meets their needs. So all of those strategies that I've given you in terms of setting yourself up for success, using the story frameworks, they will help you stand out from the crowd and dial up that EQ, the emotional intelligence, because that is a differentiator. So if you want to perform well in interview, and it massively matters, feed your good wolf, do the right amount of preparation, make sure you know how you're going to package up your experience, and be human. And be yourself.
Excellent, fantastic. So we've got a few questions which have come in around, you mentioned towards the end of the presentation, words and the speed of the presentation. So the question is, what about the speed in different languages? Does this change the word count? Obviously, because Spanish is faster than, say, English. Do you have any advice or tips on sort of word count and what you mentioned in the webinar?
Okay, so the 127 words per minute is a guide, it's a philosophy. My point about pace is that it shouldn't be constant all the way through. It's on average that many words per minute. If your tendency is to go super fast, you need to consider slowing your pace down more, so that the audience can understand you. If they're speaking the same language as you, then perhaps you can go a little bit faster, but if you've got to do what is situationally appropriate. So it would just be making sure that your pace is not too quick, and ask for feedback. So ask for feedback from that trusted advisor. Do I speak too fast? Do I speak too slow? Or film yourself and then give yourself some honest critique. Am I presenting too quickly? Is it too fast? I think under pressure, people either speed up or they slow down. So don't use your, oh, because I speak Italian and I'm really super passionate as an excuse to speak really quickly. Just slow that pace down and make sure that you add in those spikes of interest.
Excellent, amazing. So just on the back of obviously languages, so we've had a question come in. Someone's mentioned that they present a lot, but obviously presenting is in another language is obviously a challenge. So do you have any sort of tips for people who will be presenting in different languages which won't be their first language?
So I think the temptation is, when you're not presenting in your own language, is to go really slowly, and it sort of goes the other way to what we were saying before if you're presenting in your mother tongue. So visualize your success if you're presenting in a different language. I'm always so impressed by people who present in a different language to their own, because they're under even more pressure to land the messages. But be nice to yourself, and if you get a word slightly wrong, it doesn't matter. Ironically, actually, when you're not presenting in your own language, you probably take even more time and attention in your preparation to think about what you're going to say than you do if you present in your mother tongue. So try and think about yourself as in your stretch zone, not your panic zone, if you're having to present in a different language. But when you think about the language, go to the next level of consideration and think about the audience's needs, not just the language, because really you need to speak the common language for the audience, not the actual language. So I'm not talking about Italian to Italian. I'm talking about, are they a technical person and therefore I need to talk technical lingo, or are they a marketing person and I need to talk in marketing speak? So that, I think, is more important because it connects with the audience than worrying about the actual language.
Excellent, thank you. We've had a few questions for people who have never presented before. So they're asking around any tips and advice for first-time presenters.
Okay, so the tips and advice for first-time presenters is to actually think about all the informal situations that you present in versus the formal situations you present in, because you're presenting yourself every single day. So, and I expect you will have had to have done presentations at university, at school, etc. So you just need to think about those scenarios and situations slightly differently and remind yourself that actually you do have experience at doing this, and feed your good wolf. And then for your first presentation that you're doing that is more formal, lots of preparation, lots of practice, and then remind yourself, look, what's the worst that can happen? It's just a presentation. Most of us are actually in the ongoing context. So build yourself up to success in bite-sized chunks. And I definitely gave you some tips on that earlier in the session.
Lovely, thank you. So we've had a question come in. It's about how can you improve awareness and personal brand on social media to get noticed?
Oh, there's so much out there at the moment about, well, free stuff that you can access on LinkedIn Learning, and stuff that people are just posting every day about how you can come across and make sure that your brand is communicating the authentic you. I actually cover a whole chapter of that in the presenting book. So you've got to really know yourself. You've got to know the image that you're trying to communicate. Make sure you're professionally appropriate for whichever platform you are on. I think it's important that you present the real professional you. So it doesn't have to be the same. I think the rookie mistake is that you have on your LinkedIn profile a really professional looking shot, and then on your Instagram profile it's like a holiday shot. I think that you need to make sure that you've got the appropriate photos on both scenarios, on both platforms. But yeah, your job when you're trying to present brand you is to think about Jeff Bezos's quote, and he says your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. Think about what is it you're trying to communicate, and then step back from all these different platforms and make sure you're presenting the authentic you. But as I say, there's a whole chapter on that in my book. And I think a really great thought is to think about you as a product. So think for you, Paul, that would be Paul PLC. What is Paul PLC? And what's his unique or differentiating proposition? And therefore, how can I communicate that most effectively? So it's great to think of yourself as a brand.
Perfect, thank you. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So the first one is, it's about, even if you know around the slides, the product or the presentation, what will be happening, but obviously someone has been taken ill at last minute. Do you have any tip for someone stepping in at last minute? And obviously, how can they become better off giving a good impression having to step in at last minute?
I think that's a brilliant question. I think honesty would be the right policy here. And if it's not your subject, if you are not the subject matter expert, then without apologizing, explaining the situation and doing the best you can, and being kind to yourself on what expectations you have for yourself as a result of that scenario, would be worth considering. So you can only do your best in that sort of scenario. If you don't have all the answers, either try and put off having the presentation and doing it when that person is back, or do the best you can and feed your good wolf and say, look, what's the worst that can happen here? And then give that person feedback if they haven't given you proper notes afterwards. But it is not great having to present somebody else's stuff. So you can only do your best in those scenarios.
Excellent, thank you. So we've got time for one last question. So we have got loads of questions which have come in. So don't worry, I'll put them forward to Nicole afterwards and she'll be able to get in touch. So the last question is around, what if the audience has lost interest? How can you regain their interest during a presentation?
Well, I would refer to that slide that I talked about there, with the your appearance, you're asking the rhetorical questions, quoting somebody else. I think repetition is a great one, but actually the rhetorical questions I think is the best. Posing that question, being comfortable in silence, and making good eye contact with someone. Those are really great ways of interacting. Humor is a great, if you are funny, don't try and be funny if you're not funny, and if it's situationally appropriate. But actually engage with the audience. I think part of the challenge with the audience is we don't explain to them how we want them to interact with us. So it takes two to tango. So it is about them, but it's also about how you're interacting with the audience. Get amongst them. Be provocative. Ask those rhetorical questions. So if you're not feeling brave, just ask the rhetorical question and then be comfortable in silence afterwards. So you don't feel like you need to answer the question. Very often what happens if you ask a rhetorical question is somebody in the audience will answer it, which is brilliant. There, you've got your audience engagement. But that spike, all of those little strategies I gave you on the spikes of interest, mix them up, add different things in, use some multimedia, use some video, do a quiz. All of that stuff can make such a difference to the audience engagement. I think it's important to mix it up so it's not just slide 1, slide 2. So you've got lots of different levers to pull.
Excellent, fantastic. So thank you again, Nicole, for a fantastic session and all those fantastic answers to the questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for this session, but just before we go, I'd just like to let everyone know that the recording will be sent out a week from today. So you'll receive an email from Amber and BJ, and there'll be the link inside that email. Our next webinar is taking place in 2021. So it's taking place on the 20th of January, and that'll be at 12 p.m. with Jim Dell, and he'll be presenting on whether or not the personal and commercial impacts of weather and climate. So if you'd like to attend that session, please head over to the associationofmbas.com and you can register your place to attend that webinar. So last thing to say is thank you again, Nicole, for a great presentation, and we look forward to seeing everyone on the next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.